Well, good morning, everybody, as you make your way back to your seats. Like Eric said, Pastor Jesse is with NEMI on a mission trip to the Dominican Republic. There's some great photos that are starting to be posted on Facebook about that trip, so be sure to check out the Two Rivers Bible Church Facebook page. My name's Steve Scott. I'm the teaching pastor in the back, first hour. I play a few songs up here, and during a prayer, I disappear, and people open their eyes and said, "Wow, where'd Steve go?" It's because I go to the back, and I have an adult Bible fellowship back there. It's really a great opportunity to get into more of the nuts and bolts about what we believe. So Pastor Jesse and I kind of tag team. He's up here teaching the what the Bible says and what we're supposed to do. I'm back there teaching why. Why do we do what we do? As a matter of fact, we're going through a series right now called Christianity 101, and it's a great way of doing it because for those of you who don't know much yet, it's a way for you to learn the basics of who we are and why we do what we do. And the other side of that is you will be asked sometime in your life, why do you do what you do? Why do you act this way, do this certain thing? And you may not really know how to express yourself to be able to get the idea across to the person that's asking. So what I'm doing is help prepare you by giving you some of the simple ways in order to share what we do and why we do it. So over the past several weeks, Pastor Jesse has been going through a sermon series that's called The Big Questions. And he's gone through 7 different questions that fit into the category of, I always wanted to know that, but I was too scared to ask. And we've all got those moments where somebody, asks us something, or we hear somebody discuss something, and we're like, yeah, that's what I believe. I don't know why, but yeah, I believe that too. So by him discussing those sorts of things, I think it's really helpful to see, first of all, it's okay to ask a question. God doesn't expect us to just blindly follow when it kind of goes against what we may think is true. And when we ask the question, then we can start to figure out, how does this fit in to what I believe? And do I need to modify what I believe in order to fit? The answer to that, by the way, is yes. You need to modify what you believe in order to fit in what God is trying to tell us. So when Jesse gave me the opportunity to bring another big question this morning, I had to jump at it because the big question for this week is, can science and religion coexist? That's a big question. So 2 Sundays ago, Pastor Jesse mentioned a few things during his message that really got me excited about being able to talk to you this morning about science. Many of you already know, but some of you don't. I taught chemistry, physics, and astronomy here at the high school for about 20 years. So how many of y'all have had the privilege, I don't know if it's a privilege, of being in my class? Oh, I've got a bunch. So first of all, calm down. I won't make you sing the goggle song. So yeah, we're all good there. But we'll sing it. We'll have teach the worship team. So my big question is, how do I take something, this topic, which usually takes me 10 weeks to teach, and boil it down to 30 minutes? And really, the answer to that is I'm going to talk really, really fast, so buckle up. So no, I actually, God worked on me quite a bit this week in order to really pull out what I think is the most essential of what we need to know to be able to move forward biblically in what I'm going to present. So just like Pastor Jesse did, I'm going to start with a clip from the Explore God series, and it'll kind of set the footprint of what we're going to be doing today.
I'm a geek and a nerd by heart. I love the technical aspects of things, as a kid, tore apart clocks and built radios. And love that kind of stuff. And I think it would be very hard for me if I saw science and religion at odds with each other. MIT is a little bit different in that you are trained to look for the one answer as fast as you can, right? And you take your tests. They're all science or math questions that have actual answers to them. And so you're just trying to do that as fast as you can. So you're trained to look for the one answer. And in some ways that sort of primes you a little bit to look for an answer when it comes to life and faith. There actually are a lot of people who are religious. It's fascinating how many religious groups there are on campus. I think it has something to do with the institution too. The scientists there are a lot of people who follow God. There are a lot of people who are spiritual. I think a lot of that is because they're studying the cosmos. They're studying creation. They're looking around at all the data of the world, and that leads them to believe that something out there must have created this. It's a beautiful world. I would imagine that it would allow places of worship over test tubes and measurements, because you're seeing how neatly and beautifully things are designed.
So they look at the data of the world and they see God. That's amazing. But usually what happens is when we get into discussions, we end up with this. Somebody is going to get angry, and they're either going to shut down or they're going to scream that you're stupid for believing whatever you believe. And so because of that, we tend to just avoid the discussion altogether. More on that later. So I'm going to show you another image. What does this image show us? It shows us how man evolved from an ape-like creature, right? There's many problems with this image. First of all, thank you for that reference to last week's. Yeah. Wow, that was amazing. He's cursing in Greek. Yeah. So the big problem is that it gives the impression that the previous creature has died because the new creature has taken its place. Okay? So that's one thing that there is wrong with this. The problem is that there are actually races in the world today that resemble all three of the last pictures. So this is supposed to be Neanderthal man, Cro-Magnon man, and then Homo sapien, which is the last three steps in man's evolution. The problem is that the Aborigines in Australia, they have the body structure of the third from the right. And there are natives in the Alsace-Lorraine region of Europe that have the body structure of the second from the right. As a matter of fact, I saw that guy walking in front of the post office last week. So, yeah, so that's another problem with this image. The third and biggest problem is that there's no context here. I mean, without real teaching of what this is supposed to show us, we say, wow, there's a chimpanzee, and wow, there's us. So that means we came from chimpanzees. That's not what it's showing us, first of all, and it's not even close to being right. So what I want to do this morning is I want to take you through the conflict a little bit when it talks about man, the origins of man. So let's start with what the theory of evolution says about the origins of man. It says, man has evolved by natural selection over millions of years from an ape-like creature through a series of gradual changes from generation to generation that gave him an advantage over the others of his kind. This advantage allowed him to survive and pass these advancements to the next generation, where they too would have made their own genetic advantages, which they passed on, and so on, and so on, and so on. So in order for this to happen, to get from this ape-like creature to us today, what does it take? What do we need? Time. We need lots of time, millions and millions of years to make these gradual changes over time. Well, what does the Bible say about the origins of man? I'm going to take this from Genesis chapter 3, verses 26 and 27. It says, "Then God said, 'Let us make mankind in our image, in our likeness, so that they may rule over the fish of the sea and the birds of the sky, over the livestock and all the wild animals, and over all the creatures that move along the ground.' So God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them." How long did that take? One day. Day 6 of creation. That was it. One day. So who's right and who's wrong? With origin stories that differ as great as these do, how do you reconcile them? How do you make them fit? How do you put them together? One of these accounts takes millions of years and is still happening today. And the other took one day, and then God said, "It's very good," which means no change is needed. It's all done. How do we make it fit? So there's a lot of different words that get thrown around. They use words like adaptation, microevolution, macroevolution. And I'm just going to keep it really simple and just focus on one, evolution. What is evolution? Well, according to the definition, it says that evolution is the process by which different kinds of living organisms are thought to have developed and diversified from earlier forms during the history of the earth. The gradual development of something, especially from a simple to a more complex form. Right now, my brain is going in all these different directions because I want to take you in all these different places because the definitions don't even work. They just don't. But I'm not going to do that. All right. So what does evolution say about the origins of the world? Earth's evolution has taken billions of years, with the planet forming around 4.56 billion years ago, and the earliest life appearing within a few 100 million years ago. Here are some major events in Earth's evolution. The formation into a solid planet was about 2 billion years ago, and then it had to cool over the course of a couple of million years. Then bacteria showed up about 2.4 billion years ago, with humanoids appearing about 800 million years ago. And we got all these millions and billions. It just doesn't fit. It doesn't make sense in my brain. But that's the timeline, according to evolutionists, of where the earth came about, okay? But what does the Bible say? I'm going to take this straight from Genesis chapter 1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. That's Genesis 1:1. Day 1, in verse 3, it says, "God said, 'Let there be light,' and there was light. And he separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And there was evening, and there was morning, the first day." Day 2, in verse 7, "So God made a separation from the water above and the water below, and he called the expanse between them sky. And there was evening, and there was morning, the second day." Day 3, in verse 9, "And God said, 'Let the water under the sky be gathered all into one place, and let dry ground appear.' And it was so. God called the dry ground land, and the water seas. Then God said, 'Let the land produce vegetation.' And it was so. And there was evening, and there was morning, the third day." Day 4, verse 14, "And God said, 'Let there be lights in the vault of the sky to serve as signs and to mark sacred times and days and years.' And there was evening, and there was morning, the fourth day." In verse 20, we have day 5. "And God said, 'Let the water teem with living creatures, and let birds fly above the earth, above the vault of the sky.' So God created the great creatures of the sea, and every living thing with which the water teems, and that moves about in it, according to their kinds, and every winged bird according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. And there was evening, and there was morning, the fifth day." So, evolution, Bible. Who's right? Who's wrong? with origin stories that differ so greatly. How do you reconcile them? How do you put them together? One process took billions of years and is still going on today, and the other creative act of God took 6 days. And at the end of the 6th day, God said, "It is very good," which means no improvements needed. It's done. So, wait a minute. Let's go back to those days of creation. Each day of creation ended with a phrase, and it was the same phrase over and over again. What was it? Yes, sir. You're not in school. You can just shout it out. He did. He said it was good, which means he intended to make it that way. He made it that way, and he was done with that part. And then he said there was evening, there was morning, the blank day, first day, third day, fifth day, whatever it was. So, wait a minute. Doesn't the Bible say somewhere that time for God is different than time for man? Yeah, if you pull it out of context, that's not what it says. It says that it feels like when we're with God, it's going to feel like a year is 1,000 years. It's going to feel like 1,000 years is like a year. So it's talking about what it feels like when we're with God. You can't just apply that to creation, and yet that's what people do. They say, trying to fit religion and science together, they say, well, really, it's not a real day. So day one really wasn't a day. It was a couple of billion years. And day two was another couple of million years. And day three was another 500 million years. And so instead of being a day, they're letting it represent an epoch, a large period of time. Well, that doesn't work at all, because God knew we were going to be stupid and try to pick apart his word. What did God say? It was evening and it was morning. When we see evening, we know it's the end of the day. And when we see morning, it's the beginning of the day. See, it's very, very clear. God said it was evening, it was morning. That's a day, right, you dummies? So I'm speaking for God, but I think sometimes he looks at us and just says, oh. So that's one thing to look at. Another problem with this argument is the same people that make that argument say the people in the Old Testament really didn't live 300 years and 400 years, 500 years. Methuselah living to be 969 years old. Well, really, those aren't years like we measure years. Those are shorter periods, and that's why they can have more of them. Okay, wait. Now you're saying that days are longer than we know them, and years are shorter than we know them. That doesn't compute. That doesn't add up. A third argument for this is that the Hebrew word that's used in creation for day is the word yom, Y-O-M, yom. And that Hebrew word yom, back then, is still used today, yom, meaning a day, a 24-hour period of time. As a matter of fact, you see it on your calendar. There is a Jewish holiday that shows up on our calendar called Yom Kippur. That's the Day of Atonement. And everybody knows that that celebration is supposed to last one day, not a couple of million years, right? A day is a day. So if God said that his creation takes a day to make the sun, the moon, the stars, guess what? It takes a day. If God created man in a day, guess what? It took a day. So, again, we're going to have to try to reconcile these things. According to NASA's xenobiologist, fancy word for science people that try to figure out how life can exist on other planets, okay? These xenobiologists determined what was necessary for Earth life to exist. So in their scientific discovery, they said they needed these things. An energy source, light, okay? You need to have water. You need to have elements like carbon, phosphorus, sulfur, nitrogen, hydrogen. A stable environment that wouldn't disturb these things. And then, you know what? It's a miracle that God could figure out all of this science to make everything happen in the right order, isn't it? Wow. But seriously, the Bible, which gives us the account of creation, was written long before scientists figured out what was needed and the order that the things were needed. The only order that things could be in for life to exist. If this was all just made up in the Bible, what are the chances that a non-scientific person could write down the exact order that everything needed to happen in order for life to exist? Now, that's something that would take a lot of faith. God knew the order because God invented the order, and we're just finding out what that order was. So, before you start rolling your eyes in the back of your head for all of this science that I'm spouting, I need to give you the reason why. Remember, I told you I go over the why we need to know. And I'm going to take you to one verse. This is 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 15. It says, "Always be prepared to make a defense for anyone who calls you to account for the hope that is in you, yet do it with gentleness and reverence." This is meant for us, believers, to be able to talk to someone when they come against us and they say, "How can you believe in this stuff?" We need to be ready to give an answer. How can we give an answer if we don't know? And how can we know if we don't find out? And how can we find out if we don't either study or are taught by someone? That's what we do back there in Adult Bible Fellowship. We are preparing ourselves to be able to give a good answer. Not screaming like the angry lady at the cat, but to give a good answer. So that leads me to the next big question. How do we respond? If someone does come at us with something that comes totally against what we believe, how are you going to respond? Do you ignore the issue? When I was working with NASA, I had a professor that I was working alongside that when I try to push him on these things, he would say, "That's outside the scope of what we're discussing today." Wow. That sounds nice and smart, doesn't it? And that either means, "I don't know, don't ask me," or "I do know, but we're not going to talk about it here." So, of course, I had to press him. More on that later. Do you agree with the world? Boy, talking about the definition of a hypocrite. When you're in church, it's God, God, God. He created everything. He saved my life. You go out there and you live just like the world, believing what the world does. That's incongruent. That doesn't fit together. And that's not who God called us to be. God told us that we are to be strangers in this world. And in order to be a stranger, guess what? You got to be strange. Yeah, think about that. We're supposed to live our lives out there in such a way that people look at us and ask why. And then when they ask why, what are we supposed to do? Give them an answer with gentleness, right? The third thing is that you can blame it on Satan. Ooh, that's a good one. Stacy and I know a couple from a previous church that we were at that they are convinced and they want everybody else to believe the same that they do, that Satan put the dinosaur bones in the ground to confuse us. And they would not budge. They know what they know, and they know that they know that they know. And stop confusing me with the truth. The fourth thing is just agree with God. Y'all, that is the simplest answer, and it's the best answer. The reason why is because you don't have to be a genius. You don't need to know the science. All you have to do is say, I believe what God said, and if you don't agree with that, that's fine. You're arguing with God, not me. You just pulled the trump card. And that way you can go and find out more, and then you can come and have a good discussion with them. Okay? So we need to pick one of these ways to respond, and I think we'd all agree that the last one is the way to do it. And so you have to do it, though, with gentleness so that you don't offend them. Keep those avenues of conversation open so that you can have those deeper discussions. You know, when Pastor Jesse was addressing the big question of, is Christianity too narrow, or is Christ the only way to get to God? He mentioned the elephant parable. Do y'all remember that? The elephant parable, it was this idea where the king led several blind men to different parts of an elephant and asked them to describe what was in front of them by just their sense of touch. And to one, he said it's a rope. To another, he said it's a fan. Another said it's a tree trunk. All of their realities were based on a perception, a very, very narrow perception. They were just giving information based on that small amount of information that they had. That was their perception of reality. Our perception of the origins of mankind and the origin of the universe is based on what view we bring to the table. If we start with the concept of an almighty God creator, it's easy to see how God created everything with such complexity and such diversity in just a matter of 6 literal days. But if we throw out God, we're not going to use God at all, and we want to look at this through the eyes of evolution. Well, now we have to replace an all-powerful creator God with something else. What takes the place of God in evolution? Time. God takes a day because of his power in order to create whatever he created on that day. But in order for us to get vegetation to cover the earth, we're going to need a couple of billion years and a whole lot of luck. Time becomes God to the evolutionist. Why would somebody want to remove God from the equation? They don't want accountability. If we admit that there is an all-powerful creator God that is just, that means we're going to get punished for doing stuff that he doesn't agree with. No one wants that. And so it's a lot easier to just say, well, no, he doesn't exist, therefore I'm not accountable to him, and if I'm not accountable to him, then I can do whatever I want and not get punished for it. Now, I'm not a conspiracy theory guy, but it sounds like it's a big conspiracy theory to say, let's get rid of God by replacing God with time and saying that we all came about from chance. If we come about from chance, what is our self-worth? We're all accidents. If we're all accidents, we're worth nothing. What does God tell us? I knew you from the very foundation of the world. I knew you, in another verse, from your mother's womb. God loves us to the point where he knows the number of hairs on our head. Now, for some of us, it's easier than others. Sorry, Jay. But that's how much God loves us. So let me give you another example. Let's say we're walking down a beach. As we're walking down the beach, we come across a watch, and we're like, wow, isn't evolution awesome? All of these pieces just came together over time, and wonderful, we have got a working stopwatch. Isn't that what evolution says? Now, even an evolutionist would say, that doesn't work. But given enough time, everything can come together in such a way that it would start the evolution process. If I give a bag of Legos to a chimpanzee, given enough of time, that chimpanzee will be able to put the Legos together. And given more time, he might even put it together into some recognizable form. We just need to give him enough time. That's the argument. So we know, even evolutionists know, that was not created over millions of years. That took someone with knowledge and forethought and skill to put it together to make this working thing. But why don't they understand that that's exactly how life works? How about looking at the bombardier beetle? I love the bombardier beetle. It is such a cool bug because in its abdomen, it has got a mechanism that it produces two different chemicals and keeps them separate. We've got hydrogen peroxide that's in one sac, and then we've got this hydroquinone in another sac. Both of those things separate, they're fine. I mean, hydrogen peroxide, you use it when you hit a wound or whatever, right? It's something that's around. But if you take those two things and put them together, the chemical reaction that occurs is hot, explosive, steamy, and acrid. And this bug uses that as a defense mechanism. So when a critter comes to eat the bug, it just sprays this stuff in the critter's face, the critter runs away, and ta-da, the bug doesn't get eaten, and it lives to see another day. Okay, let's talk about evolution here. All of these pieces need to be here at the same time in order to function. If any of the pieces are missing, it doesn't work. What happens if the sac of hydrogen peroxide hadn't evolved yet? Well, now you don't have something to mix with the hydroquinone in order to make the icky bug juice. That's a scientific term, by the way. Yeah. If it doesn't have the sphincter muscle in order to keep it inside and mix it together and release it at the right time, then either the bug is not going to be able to keep it inside ever and not have a collection to spray into the critter's face, or it's not going to open at all and the bug is going to explode. Either way, that bug is no more. And if the bug is no more, it doesn't get to make baby bugs. And if there's no baby bugs, then that species no longer exists. You understand what I'm saying? That had to be put together at one time with all the functioning pieces. Because if anything was missing, it would not exist. It either would not have a defense mechanism and it would get eaten, or it would blow itself up. It didn't evolve. It was created, just like that stopwatch was. So, what do we do with dinosaurs? I love dinosaurs. I've always loved dinosaurs. When I was a kid, I had models of dinosaurs I put together, and they were all over my room. Always fascinated with dinosaurs. What do we do with the fossil record, those petrified bones that are in the ground? If you believe in evolution, these animals existed millions and millions of years ago, and somehow they got wiped out. And over millions and millions of years, those bones were turned to stone for us to dig up and find, scratch our heads and wonder what they were, what they looked like, and what skin they had. That's a different story. So if you are a believer in God's creation, it would just take a global catastrophe, say a worldwide flood, maybe, which drowned most of these animals and covered them up in silt and debris. And the temperatures and pressures of God reshaping the world preserved some of the bones of these animals, which coexisted with mankind, by the way, for us to find in the ground today. And the ones that survived only did so because those dinosaurs were on the ark with the rest of the animals. Now, of course, they were small ones. They were adolescent ones. You really don't want to have a full-size T-Rex in an ark, right? So you could take the babies with you. Have you ever wondered why every culture on the earth, without exception, has dragon stories? Every culture has a dragon story. How can this be? If Europeans didn't discover the Americas until 1492, and if the Americas didn't know anything about the Orient, how can they all have common stories about dragons? They all saw them. And guess what those dragons were? Dinosaurs. And what happened to them? We know our English history. Every good English history has a good English story about a brave knight. And what does that brave knight do? Slays the dragon. They hunted the dragons, the dinosaurs, to extinction. And those didn't have the privilege of being covered up with silt and debris and being preserved into the fossil record. They just decayed on the ground, like everything else that gets killed. So there are even examples of dinosaurs that are alive today, that their skeletal structure is exactly the same as what was found in the fossil record. So, plesiosaur, there's a crocodile. I don't know what that bird was, but it was on the list. Okay? Komodo dragon, shark. So, we've got birds, insects, we've got fish, we've got animals of all different kinds that are the same today as what was found in the fossil record. Wasn't it amazing that they had the forethought not to evolve like the rest of their buddies? How can you have selective evolution? If evolution is the way it's going to happen, then everything needs to evolve over time, not just the few things, the convenient things that you want to use science for. Another thing is the geologic column. I'm showing off now. The geologic column is like if you dig and take a core sample out of the earth and you look at what science shows you and all of those different layers. From this, we get the Jurassic period and the Triassic period and the Paleozoic period and all these fancy names that they give these layers. So the idea here is that the lesser evolved things are going to be deeper in the earth because they came earlier in the earth's history. And the more evolved things came later in Earth's history, more recent to our time. And so they're going to be at the top. That's what science shows. But if you come at this with the mindset of God's creation, let's go back to the flood. Flood waters come. The water is starting to rise. Anybody and everybody who has legs is going to head for higher ground. The creatures that can't move as fast, they're going to get covered up first. And the ones that can move the best are at the top of the hill saying, there's nowhere else to go, and then they go blub, blub. Okay? So it depends what your perception is of what's in front of you. You come into science with God, it all makes perfect sense. You come into science without God, now you're going to have to be creative to try to come up with an explanation that doesn't include God. Okay, for you non-science people, I'm going to give you a break, okay? I'm going to show you a completely different illustration, moving as far away from science as I can, and we're going to move to art. Thank you. All right, so if I show you representative paintings of 4 different artists. We got Claude Monet. Monet is really cool. He's got this style that he uses of painting very, very, very small flowers, but he paints fields of them and just gives this particular look that you know, oh, that's a Monet. Okay? Norman Rockwell. He's a painter that painted a lot of Americana, what they call it. It's just human relationships, regular everyday things of what humans are doing. You might see him, a guy just on a bench reading a paper, or somebody in a chair getting a haircut. Okay, he just did regular everyday things. Pablo Picasso, I don't know what kind of drugs he was on, but he used a style of painting called Cubism, and he used a lot of geometry when he did those pictures. Yay, math. And then we got Vincent van Gogh. Van Gogh had a horrible astigmatism in his eyes. And so when he would look at a pinpoint of light, like a star, instead of being a pinpoint to him, it was just a wash of white. And he just put down what he saw. And that beauty of the starry night is because of his astigmatism. It's my favorite, by the way. Get emotional about that. Y'all remember I had a coffee shop in town called The Starry Night? Yes. So, based on this information, if I showed you another painting, you can tell me who painted it. Let's see. Yeah, Rockwall. We know because that is his style, and you can know the artist based on the style. It's pretty easy, right? I picked some pretty easy examples, but yeah, pretty easy. So now let's apply this concept to bones. Look at this. We've got a bat, bird, dog, a chimp, and a T-Rex. Compare these skeletons. What do they have in common? No skin. Good. That was smart. They lost their guts. All right, they all have ribs. 2 legs, 2 arms, a head, 2 eye holes, nose hole, mouth, hips, shoulders. They're all vertebrates. They all got bones. So one way of looking at this is saying, wow, those must have all evolved from a common ancestor with that structure over a period of several million years. Or you can say, yeah, God knew what structure was going to be necessary to move around on this creation. And all he did is he started with the basic structure that he saw was very good, and then he covered it up with the proper bones, the proper muscles and skin, feathers when needed, scales when needed, in order to give us the beauty in diversity that we have around us, so that the form will match its function. But you can tell who the artist is because the basic structure is all the same. Why do fossils of ancient apes and skeletons of man look so similar? Is it because man evolved from an ape-like creature? Nope. It's because apes and man were designed by the same artist. That's usually my point where I say any questions, but no. So that MIT worship pastor, campus pastor that we saw earlier, I want to let you finish his story.
Things are designed. Whereas at other liberal arts colleges or colleges across the river or up the street, where you're studying people and mankind and societies, and you can see when you're studying each other and the stuff that we do to each other and the junk that we're part of, that it'd be easy to lose sight of who God might be. It'd be easy to lose sight that God might exist because you're studying us. But yeah, at MIT, I don't really see science and religion being at odds with each other. They just deal with different things. I really think that science deals with the how, the mechanics, how things work, and religion deals with the why, the purpose, the meaning, the stuff behind it. So they shouldn't really contradict. If all of this is God's truth, and if this really is God's world, then let the scientists dig deeply to see what's there, because they're just showing us how things work. And let the theologians and the pastors and spiritual people, let them figure that stuff out there, because they're helping us with purpose and meaning. They're different realms. And the problem is when one starts crossing into the other, where you have scientists, because of the way they see evolution, working out on our planet, and then they take the leap from there to say that God doesn't exist because of what they found here. Well, they've just crossed the line. They're not staying within their realm. And when theologians then, back in the Middle Ages, when they were arguing that the earth is the center of our solar system based on what they were reading in the scriptures, well, then they jumped as well. They took a book that was supposed to help us with purpose and meaning and tried to make science say something else. That's where religion jumps its space. But if you fundamentally let the fields do what they're meant to do, then you can have scientists who are practicing faithful spiritual people. You can have theologians who are studying, who figure out what's going on in the sciences, but they respect the limits of each of the realms. And in that way, I think they absolutely go together, because both speak of a different kind of truth, but you need both kinds of truth in our world to continue playing.
Don't be afraid to talk about science and religion. Don't worry about proving God wrong. He's a big boy. He's got it all under control. You got to remember that science will never be at odds with religion. And the reason why is God invented science. It's going to fit. The problem is human interpretation of that science. Sketchy science, bad science. We know bad science exists. Yeah, flatten the curve with 6 feet. Yeah. So be sure to give God his credit for all of the creation that's around you. As a believer, you know more about creation than an evolutionist does. Work to your strengths. Your strength is your relationship with God. And use that in the conversation. Religion and science aren't at odds with each other. People are at odds with other people. Remember that. God created science, and science is not going to disprove God. I briefly told you about the astronomy PhD that I was working with when I had that research job with NASA. He was the University of Texas's leading authority on black holes. He had regular conversations with Stephen Hawking. I mean, they were buddies. This guy was super smart. And when I was able to get into deeper discussions with him about the origins of the universe and the Big Bang, finally he just grinned at me and he says, I know where you're going with this. I know what you're trying to get me to say. Let's just leave that answer to philosophers who have a better grasp on how to handle this question. You see, he was smart enough to realize that as a scientist, he didn't have the authority to cross over into religion. And just like that, you need to remember that the Bible is not a science book. It was never meant to be a science book. The Bible is just basic instructions before leaving earth. It's for us to learn how to be a proper, obedient human to an almighty God. But everywhere the Bible talks about science, it is 100% accurate. Never proven wrong. As a matter of fact, scientific discovery has done more to prove the events in Scripture as being true than anything else. Archaeological discoveries are made using Scripture. And it's amazing, because whenever I see those stories, I'm like, yes, got him again. Good stuff. Science has never been disproven by the Bible. So my last question for you is, how are you going to respond now? We have to be ready to make a defense for those who come at us with whatever point of view that they have. You're either going to have to agree with them and buy the misperception to lie. Or you're going to have to stand with God, and you're going to have to just love on them enough and give them the information they need in order to stay in their lane. Because science and religion doesn't need to conflict. They can coexist if we stay in our lane.